Ladies and gentlemen, our next presentation begins in approximately 3 minutes.
Everything's going so fast. It's all in such high gear that sometimes it doesn't feel like me. Does it make sense?
When do you think all this?
Nights. I wake up sometimes. It's as if none of it really happened. As if nothing were real anymore.
Next time you wake up, Bob, look over at me lying there beside you. I'm yours, and I'm real.
Well, this will be great. Well, it takes some of the pressure off. Hey, Denise.
Oh, what
It
pressure.
takes some of the pressure off. I don't have to worry about making a mistake in front of 1,000 people that I don't know. Yeah.
Please do. Yep. Good afternoon, everyone. Pull up a chair down here in front. My name's Jim McGhee. I'm a member of the AAPG Foundation Board of Trustees. It gives me great pleasure and pride this afternoon to welcome you to this year's Michel T. Halbouty Lecture. I speak of pride in this moment because the Halbouty Lecture program is sponsored by the AAPG Foundation, whose purpose is to actively support professional development through education and scientific programs. We continually seek ways to share and promote the newest and most significant developments in our profession and industry. The annual Halbouty Lecture, thanks to the AAPG Foundation, has become a showcase for professionals around the world since its premiere 20 years ago, 2001. That's something that we take a great deal of pride in. The pleasure of being here today is because we're about to add another chapter to this story. In fact, you're about to hear from a speaker who has a direct and meaningful connection to the legend for whom the program is made, Michel T. Halbouty, affectionately known as Mike. Our speaker today is honorary AAPG member and past president of AAPG, Charles Sternbach. I'll let him tell you a story about his connection to Mike. He may even have a surprise for us too. Each year, the Halbouty Lecture throws a spotlight on important developments in exploration, both on Earth, around the universe. And this year's talk is certain to continue that legacy. A bit about Charles. Charles is president of Star Creek Energy in Houston, Texas. He's explored for energy in the United States and around the world for the last 40 years. He served as a geologist with Shell Oil, exploration manager for Tom Jordan, and was president of First Place Energy. More importantly, Charles has significantly impacted global exploration by capturing, recording, and communicating the industry's most significant geologic developments in oil and gas and discovery, and therefore inspiring literally an entire generation of geoscientists. He was the lead editor for the special publication Heritage of the Petroleum Geologist, which was an amazing archive of case histories. He's organized programs that have brought more than 500 of these geologist legends in our business to tell their stories. Perhaps more relevant to today's talk, Charles was inspired by the leadership of IHS Markit's Bob Fricklin, who developed the superbasin concept and further refined that and enhanced it with his colleagues in IHS, Pete Stark and Lita Smith. The point is to force explorers to challenge dogma, old ways of viewing basins, and get back to the rocks. And what message could be more important or appropriate for AAPG members? Charles also chairs the Superbasins Committee, whose focus is just that. Superbasin program is a result of that work. He's also been an influential advocate and architect for the magnificent AAP Discovery Thinking program, which celebrates its 24th and 25th renditions here in Denver. I think Charles' bottom line is this: new concepts, new techniques, new methodologies have always and will always continue to prove that the world is not running out of the hydrocarbons needed to power our modern societies. So, ladies and gentlemen, presenting the talk, Superbasin Thinking, Methods to Explore and Revitalize the World's Greatest Petroleum Basins. Welcome our friend, Charles Sternbach.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. That was very kind. Very kind. Well, we have a warm and friendly group today, and I'm glad to be among friends. So when we do these Superbasin programs, sometimes we start off by saying, let's go on a plane ride together. So is everybody ready? Buckle up. We're going to take the Superbasin Dreamliner, and see those basins up there on the map? We're going to fly around, and when we get to each of the superbasins, we're going to have one of the global experts tell us the secrets of the basin, and we're going to be flying together, so we're going to be able to discuss it and all learn it together. Oh, and we have Wi-Fi on our plane, so we're going to be able to connect to the APG data pages. So all these really bright people down here, our heritage, we're going to be able to access all this information. So, are you ready? Let's go. So before we get into what have we learned over these last 5 years of superbasins, I want to ask a fundamental question. So here we are tonight at the Michel T. Halbouty Lecture. So here's my question. Why do we hold Halbouty Lectures? I studied the Powers medalists. I went and I looked at all of the Powers medalists on data pages and read their papers because I wanted to power up and see what they had to teach us today. And each one of them have something special. That's why they have the Powers Medal. Bob Mitchum and Pete Vail, sequence stratigraphy. Bert Bally, big regional cross-section structural geology. Mike Forrest, bright spots. They all have a thing. What makes Halbouty special, why I think he belongs on the Mount Rushmore of APG, and why we hold these lectures, is Mike Halbouty had many things. He had giant fields, salt domes, heritage petroleum geologist, remote sensing, and a thing called maximum brain power. Has anybody ever heard of that? You know what it is? It's integration. So how fitting that here we are at the Image Conference. APG and SEG together. And here's the Halbouty building. Linda and I had a chance to go a few months ago, and right there on the front door of the building, geology and geophysicists, all who enter here, integrated. So, when I heard from Steve Sonnenberg that I was going to do this lecture, I thought, you only get to do something like this once. And if I'm going to do it, I want to have some friends around me. So I've got a surprise for you. Michelle, would you please stand up? This is Mike Halbouty's grandson is here with us today. And to be honest with you, I didn't think he was going to be able to come. And I'd sent him a note. He says, "Are you kidding me? I'll be there." And I was like, "Oh my goodness, Michael, I am so happy. I am so grateful to you, Michael, for being here." And after this talk, I know everybody's got some stories. We're going to go over to the foundation reception. And I want to encourage everybody who's not already a foundation member, please support it because it's a great group. And come, if you're going to the reception, you're going to have a chance to tell Michael some stories. And I also want to remember some people who are not with us here. Oh, and by the way, that's Michael on the left. I got this picture from his mom, Linda Halbouty, who wanted to be here, but she couldn't be here. So Linda, we know you're thinking about us. We're thinking about you. And I also want to give a shout out to Tommy and Sid Kelly, who can't be with us today either. But we need to give thanks to the Halbouty family for the legacy that they continue to give APG. So we're thinking about you guys, sending caring thoughts. So, okay, as Jim McGhee said, this is the 21st Halbouty Lecture. So if you're counting decades, this is decade 3. We're on a roll. This thing's got some legs. And the fun thing is, it all started here in Denver. Now, I just have to say, before we get into the meat of the talk, I was very fortunate to get to know Mike Halbouty. And I think the reason that we developed a really good friendship is of those things. I went to visit him. I was so impressed. I wanted to learn, I wanted to support, I wanted to help serve, and we became, after a while, he became a mentor. And for the first 4 Halbouty lectures, he would seek me out, and he would find me, and we would sit at the lectures together. And he would give me the unfiltered version about what he liked and what he didn't like. So for those of you who may be future Halbouty speakers in the audience, listen up. Direct from the man himself, the Halbouty tips for a good Halbouty lecture. What do you think? Maps, cross-sections, something that helps people find oil and gas. I'll be honest with you, he didn't care a whole lot for graphs, charts, and equations. He said, show it to me. And he said these words. He had courage. And I sure do think we need courage now. You can read some of these comments that he made 50 years ago. Now, another word about courage. There's a young man, some of you may know Alex Epstein. Alex Epstein is mentoring me. Alex is a 41-year-old philosopher who graduated Duke University, and he talks about how oil and gas, he doesn't mishmash it. He just says oil and gas, he even calls it fossil fuels, makes the world a better place. This young man has courage. He has so much courage that here he is, that's the back of his head, he is walking upstream on 6th Avenue, New York City in an anti-fossil fuel protest. And what's better, he's wearing an I Love Fossil Fuel shirt. Can I go back one slide, please? See if this, I wanted to, back one more time. I want to point out one person, there we go. I want to point out one person in the crowd, right here. He's smiling because he's curious what's going to happen next. So there are courageous people today. And I want to encourage Alex's message is we need to be proud of our profession, and we need to be proud of what energy and oil and gas do to bring good things to humanity. And there's his website if you want to know more, but he's an incredible young man. So young people have courage too. So have you ever, this is like Peter Falk on Columbo. Where were you on Monday, April 7th, 1997? I'm sure everybody remembers really clearly where they were, right? Well, I sure do. And there's one other person in this room that may remember that as well. Our foundation chairman, Jim Gibbs, organized an event at the Dallas convention, APG convention, called A Legendary Tale. I sat in the front row with Linda. I took 10 pages of notes. On the left are my notes from Mike Halbouty. Wildcatting can be very heartbreaking, but my credo is don't quit. Next to that is Bernard Duval, the notes that I took on him. He was our Halbouty Lecture last year, and he sent us a very nice note. And Bernard, I know you're not able to be with us here, but I hope that you'll be able to see this later. This event, organized by Jim Gibbs, got me started on my journey. Thank you, Jim. Because over the years, I have probably calculated that through various programs for organizations that I got inspired by shaking Mike Halbouty's hand at this event, I've probably well exceeded Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours of proficiency for volunteering. And many of you in this audience are right there with me. So just a word or two about my journey, and then we'll get to the Super Basin Toolkit. It all starts 1997. Then I go off and work with my local society. We have fun doing a program called HGS Legends. And we have videos of special people like George Mitchell. And he was in the very first panel, and Mike Halbouty and Marlon Downey and some really spectacular people, Marvin Davis, Bill Barrett. Then I got the idea, people seemed to like it. So we said, well, let's do this type of program where we study discoveries, and we do it at ACE. So we did the Discovery Thinking Forums, then we did the Playmaker Forums. So we're upscaling. We're going from individuals to discoveries to plays. Ta-da! Basins. So we've got a series of publications and programs for APG on super basins. And we have a few books too. So what a journey. So Alexei Milkoff, very bright professor at Colorado School of Mines, wrote a paper about the exploration process. And I would like to point out that this journey that we just talked about, I see basins, plays, leads, prospects. This is a complicated diagram, and you know what? It doesn't matter what everything says, but each of these things are work products that all of us, we're all putting a piece on these work products. But I think it's important to take the lessons in order to be effective, to be mindful of the whole elephant. You remember the story. We need to work at many scales. So, as we gear up for our flight to take off, and I share with you some stories about what we've learned about the super basins. When I was an undergraduate at Columbia University, and some people in this audience, I'm looking at you, Skip Hobbs, remember when I was there was a saying in the department that the best geologist had seen the most rocks. And it profoundly impacted me. I took every class in geology I could take. There weren't any classes left when I was done, and I attended every lecture that I could. And for me, that's why we study super basins. We need to look and learn from all these basins at multiple scales, because what we do in creativity is comparing and contrasting lateral thinking puts ideas in our head, and our colleagues put ideas in our head. So I am grateful to approximately 5,000 attendees for the 15 super basin themed programs we've done the last 5 years. Some of you recognize yourself in this picture. So now here is a map. Okay, so Mike is watching. Thank you, Mike. Here's the first map. There are going to be a lot of maps and cross sections, I promise you. So I want to give a shout out to Bob Fricklin, Pete Stark, and Leader Smith, and IHS. And one of the things I realized when I became APG president is APG does well when we communicate with industry leaders, thought leaders. We are of the industry. When the industry does well, we do well. When we are attuned to industry, we do well. So the great opportunity to work with Bob Fricklin and Pete Stark, the industry really changed. I remember Tom Albrandt, 2015, gave the Halbouty Lecture here in Denver, and it was clear the total petroleum system, you may remember that, the world had changed. All of a sudden, exploration, people were going back to the old basins, and they were getting more than ever before. And so, that got me started on super basins. I want to give a shout out. We took the concept of super basins from IHS, and we thought APG has the best geoscientists in the world. We need to deliver products and services for our members. So how about some special issues in the APG Bulletin? Thank you, Claudio Bartolini. He's a delight to work with as a co-editor. We've had 2 special issues already. I have copies of them up here if you want to see them. We have a 3rd one coming, and we have papers lined up for number 4. So we're going to produce a quartet of the world's greatest basins reference guides. And here's the places that are in the book. The ones that are basins that are circled in red are already in the super basins issues, and the ones that are in blue are coming. And if you know something about a basin we don't have covered, come see us. And I also want to say a big thank you to Bob Merrill for supporting this as APG editor. So now we get to the toolkit. So this is kind of my rainbow idea of 7 habits of highly effective energy geoscientists. What we have learned over 5 years, if I think about all the events we've created for super basins, the key things when you study them all is how technology changes the game. Source rocks, reservoir, traps, analogs, economics, and the final is creative thinking. And we're going to spend a few minutes on each of these. And so these colors, there's a few slides for each one. So here's the roadmap for the talk. Pink is technology, green for source rocks, and so on. So now let's talk about technology, a few slides. Now, I know I've shown this slide before at my APG presidential address because we love to make predictions, right? And everyone likes to have if you're standing on the precipice and you're predicting the future, what would you say here? And the same thing for the offshore Brazil. This is the Permian Basin. And of course, we all know the answer is we probably wouldn't have predicted this or this. So I want to make some new points about this. When we were here, this was the golden age. And there was a phrase that got a lot of traction in the industry called peak oil. There was one type of population of fields, and that was what our minds were around. And so there was a lot of talk of demise. What happened when George Mitchell stood here in the 1990s, and Dan Stewart, you were right there with him making it happen, is he just kept pushing, and then all of a sudden, creativity doesn't always create something out of nowhere. Sometimes it takes things that already exist, like peanut butter and chocolate, or horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing. They both exist, but not together. And a major new golden age emerges. So now let's just think for a minute. If this can happen once, maybe it can happen again and again and again. And so what I would like to offer, in I think a somewhat optimistic mode, is that if you look at the total petroleum system, and maybe back here with the tools of the trade, we'd get 15% of petroleum system, maybe we get another 15% with unconventionals, we still got a lot to go. There's a lot of irreducible, there's more recovery efficiency. And I bet you we're gonna see more waves. I don't know what's gonna trigger them, but it may have enhanced recovery. Some people speculate enhanced recovery might be part of it. But I expect we'll see more waves. And you know what? I'll bet you we're gonna see them more frequently. The peaks and the troughs, the peaks are gonna happen. So I think there's a cause for optimism. And it's driven by technology. This is a diagram that Bob Merrill and I used in one of our talks. And basically, the green is the price backdrop. And you can see proliferations of different branches of technology seem to happen when the going gets tough. And that's great, because we're innovative people. So now a couple words about the technology that has transformed the super basins. So the first one is engineering. And we all know the perfections of going from vertical wells to horizontal wells, to perfecting the horizontal wells, longer horizontal wells, more horizontal stages, more fracturing, different fluids, stacking the horizontal wells. Lots of different things happening. Offshore, same thing. Engineering enables us to go deeper and deeper and deeper as we see the reserves. And in the talk today from John Dolson, how we're finding deeper and deeper fields in the offshore, well, it's in combination with engineering. And we have to give a shout out, oops, can I go back one, please? I have to give a shout out to geophysics, and we need to give geochemistry its due for its great contributions advancing. Now, one of the things a buddy of mine said is when we talk about technology, we have to talk about how geology is foundational to the development of the technology. So here is an example from Discovery Thinking, number 5. I keep count of them, as you know. Tomorrow's 25. And in the 5th Discovery Thinking, Jim Henry in the Permian Basin talked about how when you're near the shelf Central Basin platform, you have pretty coarse-grained rocks and vertical wells are just great. But as you get deeper in the basin, by necessity, you need to kind of break things up. And so that's how geology works hand in hand with technology. Similarly in the offshore, these are Gulf of Mexico on the top, Brazil on the bottom, subsalt imaging. We're going to talk a little bit about the power of imaging and how it's transformed these basins. So here's some slides from a good friend of mine, John Paul Van Gestel. It's a discovery in the Gulf of Mexico. We don't need to know which one. This is the seismic pre-drill, 1997 in the upper left. Looks pretty good, right? Let's drill it. It's a high. There's a big subsalt. There's a salt sheet here, so we're going to drill a subsalt prospect. Boom, we drill it. But as we drill it, seismic's getting better. So we can image better, and we drill a few more wells. Seismic's getting better because you know what? Technology doesn't stand still. And we're integrating the wells, so it's getting better and better. Well, and we're looking really good. Lots of internal faulting. Here's a map. Let's look at a cross-section. Seismic profile. At early days, 2003, you can see there's a high and there's some salt. See it better. This is like going to the eye doctor. Which one do you prefer? Oh, I like this one. Look at that, 2019. Look at all that internal features that make a difference when you're producing the field. The point is this, we just keep technology keeps advancing. We've heard a lot about big data, and I have to say a word here. We have a good friend, Bill Fairhurst. Many of you may know Bill. Bill was at the BEG and TORA, the Tight Oil Resource Assessment, and he worked on all the big data. from the assessments for BEG. And he's now in a PhD program at OSU, is Rick Fritz here? On data analytics. Thank you, Rick. What a program. But what's wonderful is Bill is in his 60s and he's going to get a PhD on data analytics. Why is this fantastic? Because he has a lifetime of experience of meaningful analogs in his head that he is going to use the data. His comments are, you have to understand the fundamental geology and then you can use the data. If you just try to let the data tell you what the story is without models in your head, you can go wrong. Like, for example, on the right, here's from Bob Shoup. These are data points contoured. They're the same data points. They're contoured two different ways, and the difference is the concept in a geoscientist's head, because they looked at core and they decided that it was more like the one on top, rated streams, than the one on the bottom. And Bill Fair says one other comment. We've all heard the phrase garbage in, garbage out. Bill says you need to spend 80% of your time in data analytics getting good data. Because if you don't, you can process it and process it and process it, and, well, garbage in, garbage out. Geoscience are needed for that. Let's talk about source rocks, the fuel of super basins. So we're going to have a few slides here. So here's from our good buddy Rasul Sorkabi. We all know that there are certain horizons that are very prolific for source rocks. But what I think is really interesting, and what I hope Rasul will write in his paper for us, Bob, in the Super Basin Special issue coming up, is all the secondary petroleum systems in the world's greatest basins that are previously underappreciated. And we made a list. Dan Jarvie helped me make a list of a lot of these underappreciated source rocks. And from geochemistry, a lot of times in these systems, we get whispers of other deeper petroleum systems that might be meaningful and significant. I love this quote by Rudyard Kipling. You can see on the bottom. I like Rudyard Kipling. As we think about the migration, and this is a thank you, Rick, for this slide. Rick has a great paper on the Anadarko Super Basin. We look at what I think of it as a continuum of oil habitats. So we know there are in situ plays, we know there are migrated carrier bed plays, and we know there are migrated plays. And so back to the think like oil. So a lot of ways in these super basins that people are finding more reserves is they're looking at all the pathways. So let's start in the source rock. This is a slide from Scott Sheffield. And of course, thickness matters. You can see the key plays, and why the Permian stacks up so great is not only its thickness, but I want to thank Irene Irango from her distinguished lecture from APG for this work, where she shows it's really critical when you need to crunch up source rock that there are different configurations. We all know the Bakken model where there's a tight reservoir in between, sandwiched between source rocks, and of course the Wolfcamp is just one thick pile of lots of interbedded, thick, crunchy, thin, crunchy things and source rock. And that interbedding, it all affects how you complete it. Geology is fundamental to how you complete it. It's fundamental to landing zones. So now we're coming up. Remember that diagram. We're coming up from the source beds. We're into the carrier beds, migration pathways. Beautiful special issue of the bulletin on carrier beds. And Dick Stoneburner, a great friend of APG, gave a talk in our Super Basins conference, and he outlined some possible plays that he thought would become carrier bed plays, migration paths. Some of them are already being made. And the petroleum system folio sheet. I think every play really needs to have a sheet like this. And how fitting that Les Magoon, who designed these folio sheets, is going to be recognized here at this conference for creating them. So as we think about the migrated plays, I love to show this. See if my little animation works here. That's the uplift. So the Permian Basin gets a late tilt, and ever since I can remember being a geologist at Shell when I was working in the Permian Basin, there was this thing called ROZ, residual oil zone. And somehow, when the late basin gets a tilt and the migrated oil moves, it leaves a residual oil zone. It can be recovered if you're clever and you use EOR techniques. And there are some people who are working on this in the Permian Basin. But you know what I've learned from these super basin conferences? The Permian Basin is just one example of a basin with a late tilt. In fact, I contacted Steve Meltzer and Bob Trentham, who were sort of the leaders in this residual oil zone technology, and we came up with a global residual oil play. There's a lot of places where there are late tilts and residual oil zones. So let's talk about reservoir. Oops, went backwards. One of the things from studying successful explorers, and we heard about it in some of the discovery thinking talks today, and in some of the previous discovery thinking, and in a lot of the super basins, if you're in the offshore, one of the most important things, this is work from Michael Bloom, recent past president of SCPM, is you need to be thinking about the source and the sink. And here are some diagrams of different basins and their fetch areas and where they put the sediment in the down dip position. And here's some great work. Paul Weimer, are you still here? Paul was here earlier. I hope you'll watch this on reruns. This also, I credit not only Paul, but most certainly Henry Pettingill, because there is a commerciality to the way these fan systems develop. So here's an example, Mars Field. It is a really prolific field. It is a small area, but this vertical bar is thickness. So it's small but thick. So what that means is, commercially, whoops, they're advancing on me there. Jeff, can you go back? Thank you. Commercially, this is a gold mine. And although Scarborough Field and some of these other big area fields are great, as Marlon Downey would say, well, if you find a field, you just take what you can get. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a big giant like this, except that it's aerially flattened. And so as we look at what makes a great deep water field, there are elements of commerciality that enter into the discussion. Cliniforms. So we all learned in introductory geology, the J.L. Rich, the underform, cliniform, fondiform, or in other terminologies, the bottom set, the foreset, the top set. What we've learned in studying all these superbasins is cliniforms matter a lot. In the Williston Basin, the Bakken and the different silt zones that are the landing zones are in the toe sets, in the source rock. In this very seismogenic example from the Argentine, the Neuquén Basin, also the key things are in the bottom sets. Whoops, it's advancing on me there, Jeff. Thank you. In the Anadarko Basin, as Rick Fritz has pointed out, it's largely the cliniforms and the top sets are the seal. And as Dick Bishop pointed out earlier, in the glorious West Siberian Basin, the Bazhenov produces from everything, including the top sets. And the great discoveries in the mid-continent, people, look at these little cliniform or top sets. People are going horizontal. This is Kristinic and Lupo. And of course, the great big discovery in the North Alaska superbasins, all about the top sets. Thank you, Bill Armstrong and team. So the lesson here is, if you're in a superbasin, look at all, and you see cliniforms, look at all their different manifestations. A few words about trap. All the giant fields are concentrated mostly in superbasins, and they have attributes, and that's why the John Dolson data set that we're putting out is so valuable, because if you study the attributes of the giant fields in the superbasin, you can make some observations. Like, for example, that there are a lot of structural traps in the Middle East, but most basins have a mix of structured and stratigraphic traps. Therefore, we're probably overlooking stratigraphic traps in the Middle East, and you could devise a program on that. And I'm just pulling out one example. In the giant field database, what we're seeing are a rejuvenation of stratigraphic traps. Michael, your grandfather would be thrilled. Mike, in the 70s, he told us, look for the subtle stratigraphic trap. Come on, you dummies, just do it. Well, we didn't have the tools we have today. So finally, we're doing it. We're up 50 or more % of giant field discoveries are stratigraphic traps or combination structure stratigraphic traps. They're in sands and they're in carbonates, like Zor, the one we just saw in Discovery Thinking. Whoops. Can we go back? There we go. So now we jump to one of the final sections, analogs, the importance of analogs. This is from Tom Ewing. Here's the 30-second pitch. What does a superbasin look like? So let's use the Permian Basin as the prototype. And here's my 30-second elevator pitch. It has one or more multiple source rocks, preferably low in the column, a thick fill of reservoirs, and a tight regional seal, and it's relatively undeformed. Done, 29 seconds. That's the key motif. And it has enough burial, okay, an extra second too, has enough burial that it's all in the mature oil window or gas window, and the timing is right. I like the tilt. So let's look at the West Siberian Basin. It's the same motif. Source rocks low in the section. This is from Alexei again. Lots of reservoirs at a tight regional seal. And over here is the West Siberian Basin. This is the Permian Basin of the US for scale. Pretty sobering. After listening to Dan Jurgens talk today about geopolitics and Russia and China and global politics, where the oil is, well, they got a lot of it. Examples from the Appalachians. Lynn and I are going to the eastern section next week. This is work from Bill Zagorski. And the key here is in a fold and thrust belt, like the Marcellus, you want to be in the less deformed area. So you don't want fractures in your core. This is from the more structurally deformed area. You want less deformed. And we are getting a paper on the West Canada Sedimentary Basin, Paul McGhee and Per Peterson, that are going to show how these overpressured petroleum systems are trying to escape in another fold and thrust belt. This is one of my favorite analogs, because when you start studying the superbasins, you can say, that looks like this basin, or maybe that. So that's what Alfredo Guzman did. Remember our good pal Alfredo? Ted? So he worked with Chris Cheatwood, and they looked at the Sprayberry in the Midland Basin up here, and they saw these little thin sands, and then boom, down in Mexico, Alfredo says, I see similar types, depositional mines. They're different ages. It doesn't matter. Lateral thinking doesn't require everything to be the same age. But what's the difference? The Sprayberry trends made a lot of production with 500,000 wells, and this is, Itchacantepec is one of those basins waiting for capital, just waiting to be discovered. It's virtually undrilled. So the other analogies, we talked about the Gulf of Mexico, Brazil, the pre-salt, the subsalt. This is amazing to me how salt, canopy, not only does it bury a hidden world in Brazil and a hidden world of prospects in the Gulf of Mexico, salt's thermal properties give us a great surprise, because what otherwise would have been too deep and too gassy, well, actually it's cooler than it would have been because the salt cools things down. So a lesson there is helpful in all pre-salt plays. So I love the US News and World Report. They used to have a thing called News You Can Use. And APG has a policy, you're not supposed to take photos of slides, but you have my personal permission to take a photo of this slide. This is resources, news you can use. These, as I mentioned, in these various programs, we have worked hard to put usable content for you, dear APG member. You can go to the superbasins.org and you can access previous superbasins. We've got about 60 presentations of individual basins by the experts. This is a resource you can get to right now. Same thing on the playmakers. And Linda, thank you to my wife Linda. She videoed a lot of those and made them available. And the discovery thinking, like today. I hope that the talks from today and the talks from tomorrow will join the archives on data pages. So resources. So I have to take a moment and say a few things about energy, environment, economics. I'm going to see Scott Tinker in a few weeks, so I have to make sure that I covered these bases. One of the things that I want to point out is we're making progress. We all know it's about emissions. And you can see the countries that are reducing emissions, and we're all on one planet, so we have to work together. Chris Wright, who was brought to my attention by Bill DeMis, and I've really enjoyed looking at all that, his work, Bill. I pulled this example of Denver, how over time, we're making progress. We need to make more progress, but we're making progress. And one of the things I like to say is we have to be fair, back to Alex Epstein. Which of these two do you think is more environmental? I leave it to everyone to decide for themselves, but my point is, we have to, can I go back please? We have to be honest and not just talk about the bad things of oil and gas. We have to talk about the good things of oil and gas. We don't do that enough. We sure do talk about the good things of alternate energies, but we don't talk about the other side of the ledger. We need to be balanced. And a word about, I want to throw in the service companies because this fits in with the economics. I think the service companies are unsung heroes in our industry. In all of the super basins that we've studied, without their work with the operators, we wouldn't be able to drill all these wells. We wouldn't be able to perfect all of these completions. Thank you, service companies. So I love this quote from Wallace Pratt. Came across it when I was doing my Powers Up with the Powers Medalist reading. Took me about a month and a half. I read a lot of papers. But we really need to work within our communities. And Linda Price today gave a great example of the ExxonMobil work that they're doing in South America. So my favorite, this is in the, if you know the Covey thing, the seventh habit is the one that sharpens the saw, the creative thinking. I want to say what we are learning as we look at the world's greatest basins, what we've talked about, and we've heard it in the industry, there's short cycle and long cycle. So there's two different workflows for geoscientists as these super basins are getting developed. In the mature, in the unconventional plays, and I've talked with Bill Fairhurst about this quite a bit, there's a lot of arrows going back and forth. So there's constant studying of production decline, well economics, outlooks, subsurface characterization. It's a really intense, and when you're drilling wells, David Kirsch, you've made this point before, you can drill a lot of wells if you're working unconventionals. If you're working long cycle for a major offshore deep water fields, and thank you to Gary Stephenson Brownsdorf, you could be working 5 or 10 years before your project gets drilled and commercialized. And in the onshore, it's more rapid for small companies. They can't afford to do this. But you see, I tried to just squeeze that up a little bit. What always, I think one of the portions of our industry that's highly underappreciated are the independents. We hear a lot from the majors because they're big and they really do set a lot of what happens. But when you look at some of the basins, 80% of the exploration and production gets done by independents. And why that's good in the United States is because that's a lot of shot on goal. That's a lot of innovation. Lots of people trying to do things different ways. And the independents really do have a lot to contribute. And in the US super basins, they do. So as we go global, maybe that's why North America has leapfrogged, is just because the Permian Basin is one of those kind of basins where everybody's got a pickup truck and they're all trying something different, and they all tell their neighbor when they do something good, or their neighbor finds out that they did something good. And for the big companies, I love this graph. Again, credit to Strickland and Stark. When you think about which of the big companies are in the most basins, the question on my mind is how do they share best practices? Because when you roll this up to APG, how can we serve our members? How can we help with the technology transfer? So we're learning about geology of each of these basins. How can we help all of our members share these best practices? So to me, that's a real part of the strategy. And from a creative thinking standpoint, this is the taxonomy of learning. I've enjoyed working with Bill Fairstead. I know you're really big on creativity, but we all know that early remembering, understanding, those are fundamental skills we learn, and sometimes you can get pretty far with those. You know, you do flashcards, but as you evolve in thinking, you are able to analyze and evaluate. But the creative thinking are the breaks, and that's what the discovery thinking is all about. Those are all stories that have some kind of breakthrough thinking. It's an evolving hierarchy, and thank you, Dick Bishop, for this one. As we take our data, interpret it, knowledge it, we get to a predictability and ultimately what we're trying to get. And it comes from experience. And analogs is wisdom. We can look at things faster. And here's the good news for us aging individuals. You get more experience as you get older. So that's why a lot of people make discoveries in their 70s and 80s. I remember John Amoruso and Mike Forrest and, oh my goodness, Mike Johnson. And anyway, it's incredible to build on it. And this is, I think, another very important point. Not only do we get our own experience through time, oops, can I go back, please? But we get our experience from our collective community. That's the heritage, back to what Mike Halbouty told us, the heritage of the petroleum geologist. And we have this gift of all this previous knowledge that we can use. And of course, it comes with a price tag. We're supposed to contribute for those who come after us. We have to do that. So that's it. So that's a quick tour of 7 observations from studying the world's greatest basins over the last several years. And if you're interested in more, there is a APG Bulletin paper. You can grab the reference here. It's in the first Super Basin Special issue of December 2020. Details them a little bit more. So to conclude, I hope the service on the plane's been good. Get ready, put your seatbelts on, we're about to land. But we've taken a lot of lessons from these basins. Oh, can we stop that? Thank you, Jeff. I got a little, somehow the clicker's just clicking itself. So here are the takeaways. Best geologist has seen the most rock. That hasn't changed in 40 years for me. And the most analogs and the most viewpoints. We have to think on many scales. The small, the fields, the wells, the fields, the plays, the basins, the continent, the earth, and after Kirsten Seebach yesterday, boy, wasn't that great? You gotta include Mars too, I guess. Can we get the next one there, Jeff? Our heritage is the 4th dimension that lifts all of us. And I love this quote. I credit Susan Morris, but we all know that Wallace Pratt was thinking along the same terms. The greatest energy source is the energy within all of us. There's a lot of references and useful material here. And I want to say one final thing, and then we can have refreshments. I want to thank my wife, Linda Sternbach. Thank you, Linda, for sharing the journey with me and being by my side. And she's a geoscientist. It's great. I have 3 degrees in geology, and I married 2 more. I hope everybody has a great conference. Thank you.
Charles, on behalf of the foundation, let me present you with our thanks.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate it.
Stick that in your pocket.
I'm going to give it to a university.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You want me to hold it, Dave?
Yeah. Hold it up.
Can we get up?
Yeah.
You get up and up. We need this. We need a photo with this young man.
Yeah.
That, my friend, was brilliant. You're going to have to send me a copy of that.
I can do it.
Okay.
I hope they have.